I want to add that Ange is the interim artistic director of Rice and Beans Theater, and I also am working at Vancouver Asian Canadian Theater now since 2022. So Ange is the boss.
Wow. Thank you so much, Derek. Derek was the co-founder of Rice and Beans Theater along with Pedro Chamale. He is on pat leave, and I'm replacing him for about a year. And I'm so honored. I'm so honored for that, that these two have been working their butts off for 15 years on a theater company. In the first few years, they were barely paid, and it was so inspirational. Yeah, come in. You're not late. I'm buying time for you. It was such an honor to just see you guys work and be great role models. I just want to also say that it's an honor to be here for Asian Heritage Month here at VPL. I get to share space with Jasmine and Derek, amazing artists in their own rights, working so hard and putting community first and putting integral, moral, amazing work. And yeah, I'm just a little bit giddy right now. Thank you so much for being here. Audience members, I don't recognize most of your faces, so this is really exciting. I just want to describe Jade Circle. Has anybody seen it at all, by the way? Yeah, I see 2 hands, 3 hands. Okay, I'm going to describe the show. You saw it, Derek, because Derek directed it many times.
He saw it so many times.
He saw it many times. That's fantastic. I'm just going to describe the play description for you all, and then after that, we're going to show you a visualizer, not necessarily a trailer, but a visualizer of what you might experience when you see the show. Jade Circle is a beautiful multidisciplinary performance by Jasmine Chen. Through powerful music, captivating movement, and poignant storytelling in Mandarin and English, Jasmine finds her place within the legacy of her matriarchs. Yearning to reconnect with her late grandmother, she embarks on a transformative journey to relearn Mandarin and unearth lost stories of her grandmother's past through intimate interviews with her mother. As a second-generation immigrant, Jasmine's personal journey and background greatly inform her artistic expression. Her experiences and heritage shape the stories she tells, adding depth and authenticity to her performances and creative endeavors. And now I'm going to ask Heather Barr, a general manager of Rice and Beans, to just cue the visualizer. Thank you. Such a beautiful concept there, that visualizer. Fun fact, that was filmed in Pitt Lake?
Yeah, we shot at a studio in East Vancouver called Progress Lab, and we also shot at the beautiful Pitt Lake. And Anjela was so instrumental in helping us with that shoot. So thank you, Anjela, for being part of it.
It was such a pleasure. It was great. Fun fact about that, too, was that the actors that you saw there, the 3 women. Leslie Dos Remedios, that was her child, and then that was her mother. So it was a true cast of 3 generations of women. You know, it was so beautiful to see them domino next to each other. It brought tears to my eyes when I first saw that. I thought about my mother and the matriarchs that are within me. So just think about that feeling for a second of feeling all these generations within you, the capabilities of retracing back through either language, through song, and that's the feeling that you get when you watch the play. And I'd love to credit the director Solara Than Bin Dang, such a great vision in collaboration with you, Jasmine. It was so fun. So I'm going to ask Heather to now cue the slides of the production at Gateway. These slides were taken during a run, and you really get to experience some of the beautiful visual storytelling that theater so beautifully does. Hello, take a seat. This is gorgeous. And so if you're curious who were the collaborators, they are found in the Rice and Beans website. This was programmed at the Gateway Theatre, produced by Rice and Beans in association with Vancouver Asian Canadian Theatre. Now, let's talk about making multilingual theater. It is such a fun thing to kind of wrestle with, to explore. For me, I don't know, in this time, I've been working in the theater for a while, and I feel like this is such a new thing to contend with, because more and more voices are being elevated and more voices want to go, we also don't want to just speak English, which is such a relief, because I've always found that Vancouver was not just an English-speaking city. It's such a huge multilingual city, and of course we want to express art in our own languages as well. And to see Jasmine do that was such a big release for me. So let's talk about translation. So Jasmine and Derek, feel free to tag team this question, but in creating multilingual performance with translation, something is always lost in translation. And can you talk about the golden nuggets in the Mandarin words that might have been lost in a mixed audience? Mixed, I mean, they might be Mandarin speakers or speak a little bit or even just hear Mandarin, or they don't understand at all. Or can you talk about the gains that you've observed as well when expressing something on stage that's not necessarily in English, but something that everyone in the audience can feel together?
Sure, I'll jump in, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing attention to the fact that we live in Vancouver. It is an incredibly multilingual city, and I was doing some research recently, and I saw that according to Statistics Canada and recent data collected from the most recent census, hello, welcome, 1 in 4 people who live in Metro Vancouver speak another language other than English and French. And after English and French, the most common language spoken at home is Mandarin, which I was like, oh my gosh, wow. So that to me just brought up even more importance as to why we should see more languages on stage. I think there's been such a wonderful push to see more diversity and to really highlight equity in our art spaces. But often we don't talk about diversity of language and recognizing that, I think the statistics was, around 26 people speak another language at home other than English and French. So that's a huge portion of the population. So just to give a little bit of context as to this piece, when I originally started writing it, as Anjela mentioned, it's about my journey of relearning my mother tongue of Mandarin, which My parents, of course, they tried to put me through Chinese school. I'm sure many people in this audience might have had that experience. And as a young child, of course, Chinese school was very boring. And at that time, growing up in the 90s, it wasn't cool to speak another language. If you were different, you might be bullied at school. So I did not learn Mandarin when I was young. I spoke it with my grandparents. That was really the only time that I was speaking Mandarin consistently, was with my grandparents. And so the inspiration for this piece came when my grandmother passed away. And it was after her death that I realized, oh my goodness, I never had the opportunity to really get to know her because of the language barrier. We were very close in our relationship because she cooked for my sister and I every night. She took care of us. That's how we spent time together, and her love language was through caring for us. But as a child, I didn't, take the time to get to know her and her life story. So it wasn't until she was gone that I realized if I had spent that time learning Mandarin, I could have gotten to know her. So it was at that point that I realized, okay, I have to do this. I have to try and learn Mandarin. And through that process, I started writing this show, this solo performance. And originally, I wrote it mostly in English because that's what I could write in. And I wrote the parts in Mandarin that I, had my very limited vocabulary. And luckily, my dear collaborator is in the audience here, Johnny Wu. He was my translator, Mandarin coach, and cultural consultant. And so very much in partnership with Johnny, Johnny helped me to translate more of the piece into Mandarin. And I realized, actually, performing this piece majority in English with a little bit of Mandarin actually doesn't make sense. And it's not true to the story that I'm trying to tell. So why don't we try and even out that ratio? Or actually, why don't I challenge myself as a performer to try and do most of the play in Mandarin? So when we talk about translation and what gets lost in translation, I think Johnny and I, had a lot of fun digging into the nuance, but inevitably, there's always going to be things in a language that can't translate to English. So I remember there was one section that had more poetic text, and the Mandarin word had this feeling of, I was trying to say some stories can't be translated. And the term that we used was 刻骨, which, is that right, Johnny? Yeah. Which, the literal translation is like carved in bone. And what I was trying to say with that is some of these ancestral stories, they're in our DNA. And especially when it comes to intergenerational trauma that our ancestors might have experienced, that maybe they didn't want to necessarily talk about or share with us through words, they're still in our bodies. That still gets passed down. And so that word, that phrase was so perfect in encapsulating what I was trying to get across, which was these stories are carved in my bones. But when we were putting the English, subtitles, we couldn't really include that. I can't remember what we ended up saying. What do we say? Oh yeah, some stories can't be translated. Some stories are held beneath the skin, too close to the bone to be extracted. So, too close to the bone to be extracted doesn't quite have the same poetic texture as, 刻骨. And even in the sound 刻骨, you can feel that it's kind of hitting you in the gut. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
Eric?
that was also one of my first examples because we had such a great time and it was such a great portal into talking about this multilingual piece. Embodiment, even we've talked about that so many times in rehearsals and in performance, how languages changes the way we embody ourselves. I grew up in Hong Kong, so I speak English, Mandarin, and Cantonese. My Mandarin is very obviously Hong Kong. But yeah, the difference in in your thought process, in the scene or in the story, Jasmine, were so different once you know, you made the decision to incorporate as much Mandarin as possible into this project. And yeah, it's you know, I've known you for a good handful of years now, if not a little longer, but yeah, it's a completely different Jasmine. And yeah, I had a similar experience or a parallel relationship to my own mother tongue, Cantonese, when I first moved here about 20 years ago for theater school at SFU, all of that. I spent, and you know this, we went to school together. I spent about the first 10 years in Canada. I keep popping the mic. I spent about 10 years, my first 10 years in Canada, pretending that I didn't speak or understand any Cantonese or Mandarin because of that whole societal assimilation pressure. And I thought, oh, well, if I sound different from everybody else, then I'm not going to get a job, especially in theater where you need to talk and speak perfect English or whatever. So first day of class, in acting class, voice class, it was voice class, I walked up to my teacher and go, hey, can you, I don't want to sound like this, like I very much sounded like I grew up in Hong Kong when I speak English. And yeah, I told my teacher, like, hey, can you get rid of my accent and all of that? And I would like not hang out with any East Asian friends and things like that. And so, you know, we can all extrapolate whatever reasons. And I'm the first of my family to move away from home as well. So yeah, so working on this piece was also another kind of big step in me. It's been about 10, if not more years since I started reincorporating other languages back into my work and also in my life. But yeah, working on this, like the biggest thing that I found was really another reminder of, don't do that again, Derek. Like, that's at least half of you. Don't throw that into the ocean, you know. And the other thing about translating is, well, performing in a language that's other than English or French is this gentle alienation that we are also inviting and challenging non-Mandarin speaking audience members and also whoever worked on the team as like a gentle alienation, gentle challenge to, at least for me, when I incorporate Cantonese or anything like this in our work, whether it's translated or not, it's a little bit of me, even with this, I know we're going to talk about the songs in a bit, so me as a director going, hey, when I first moved here, this is kind of what it sounded like for you, who don't like understand, I had to come here and get used to a completely different language all around me and kind of just have to accept that this is a thing, and you know, it should be, we should all communicate. But it's, yeah, for me, when it comes to multilingual work and when I attend shows in languages that I don't speak or understand, that's kind of the same reminder that, hey, you know, especially in Vancouver or wherever in BC and Canada, like there's so many of us who come here speaking a different language and have to adapt. So yeah, it's a little sharing of that feeling. I have other random thoughts, but that can't wait.
Thank you. I feel like also the location where the show was first produced in Richmond, BC, a huge population there of multi-generational Chinese communities. And it was so, I was just talking about this with Jasmine. Someone had attended the show and she had grown up in Richmond. And this was the first time she was able to watch a theater show in that theater in her mother tongue. And she's been living in Richmond for 30 plus years. So to have that release for her, that was very important. And then a reclamation of, wow, I can totally express myself in my mother tongue. What does that do in that language? Translation is so interesting. And and depending on who the audience is, because you hear something that you don't necessarily understand, but you are having the same reaction with audience members, means that, wow, even though I don't recognize the words, we are all having the same feeling. And that's what it feels like to be a human, finding common ground with someone sometimes, you know?
Yeah, and it's just sharing of it, and it comes out of love, of compassion, of sharing this language that meant so much to you and Jasmine and to so many of us in many ways. It's like, hey, our languages are just as valid, just as important, and this is a part of, you know, our identity and your identity, Jasmine, in this project's case, and it is very much to say I exist and I should be allowed to exist, just like many other people, right?
Let's talk about cultural consultancy. In that, for example, oh, I'm Filipino. I'm gonna make Filipino work, but it's my culture. I don't think I need a cultural consultant. I'm just gonna do this thing on my own, and you know, hopefully it's good. So here's the fun thing about cultural consultancy. Johnny Woo is here. Woohoo! Is that I'm just wondering, how important is it in this particular process, and what does that and what you've learned, what does that mean to future shows that, you know, that you folks might produce one day as well? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of cultural consultancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who didn't get a chance to see Jade Circle, hopefully we'll bring it back one day so you can see it. But for those of you who didn't get a chance to see it, it was very much a personal storytelling piece that had movement and songs, but primarily it was my personal story. As you heard earlier, my background is Taiwanese and Singaporean, but my mother's side of the family, you know, my mom grew up in Taiwan. So while I was telling a story that, you know, very much reflects my experience as a second generation Taiwanese Canadian, I knew that some of the themes within the piece would speak to a broader Taiwanese audience, but also other folks who identify as part of the Taiwanese or Chinese diaspora. So it was really important for me to understand how the content of my piece might affect or land on different groups of people. And then to get really specific about the performance, again, Johnny and I were very much partners in this process, where the cultural consultancy, the Mandarin coaching, what else, and the translation were three threads that were truly braided together to create the performance. So for example, you know, I'm second generation Canadian, so when I speak Mandarin, I very much have, you know, kind of a Canadian accent, right? So even though I was asking Johnny to make sure that my pronunciation was accurate, it would have been unnatural if I had tried to have like a very Taiwanese or a very Chinese accent. In order for it to feel like me, I had to maintain, you know, what my voice and how I speak my lines, you know, to try and make that authentic. In the piece, I was also playing my mother. And her voice is very different from mine. So that was another nuance that we had to try and capture, which is, okay, she grew up in Taiwan, but then she moved to Singapore, and then she moved to Canada. So when she speaks Mandarin, how is that different from when I speak Mandarin? And how do we make that clear to an audience? So all of these really subtle textures are what bring that authenticity to the performance.
Now I'm going to ask, let's move into the songs of the play. So there are a couple of songs in Mandarin that are throughout the piece that help tell the story of you, your grandmother, and your mom. And I want to ask this to Derek. Can you talk about the staging choices on a few songs and the design elements you brought forward to assist in the storytelling and kind of let Jasmine's story unfold.
Yeah, there are a lot of songs written into the piece, and
I wonder if I should just give a little bit
do
of
you want to
context
talk about the
for the songs.
Because
Yeah.
I don't think I should explain.
Yeah. So, in this process of relearning Mandarin, it all kind of started because when my grandmother passed away, the first thing that kind of came to my mind was these little snippets of children's songs that she taught me when I was a kid. These Mandarin children's songs that I had learned as a child. And I couldn't remember the lyrics, I couldn't remember the whole melodies, and truly I was so heartbroken because I couldn't remember them. So I asked my mother if she could reteach me those songs. So through her reteaching them to me, not only did I get to feel that connection with my grandmother again, but also that's what led to our in-depth interviews. So that's just some context for the songs.
And Jessica knowing some of the songs that you...
Yes, so these were songs, because my grandmother was a school teacher, so she also taught these songs to my sister, my auntie, all of the neighborhood children, and her elementary school students.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine. And those songs, they all served quite a varied and wide range of functions in terms of storytelling. And this piece, for example, some of them would be storyteller Jasmine quoting her family, singing those songs. And some of them would be transitional moments of storyteller Jasmine transitioning into a story in storyteller Jasmine's mother's voice or into a different story. So a lot of those songs ended up becoming portals that moved the story along. Like not so much in like a musical theater way where you talk about, oh, I did this and then that happened and so on, like not so much narratively that way, but in terms of location and tone and conceptually, a lot of those songs were used as either introductions or buttons for a segment of the story. And of course, because of all that visceral, nostalgic, and very, when you hear music, it kind of skips a certain layer and it just get to something that sometimes you forget. And so much of that is that. And often it was also used to bring some levity into the show, because so much of this stuff that Jasmine, you talk about in the show are so personal, intimate, but then also quite big political things of why people are displaced. And honestly, genuinely, a lot of these like East Asian folk songs, the lyrics are just absolutely very ridiculous.
Yeah,
donkey song.
Yeah. Just to add to what you're saying too, and for anyone out here who might be a writer or a creator yourself that might be thinking of maybe writing your own story or creating your own solo show, music is always attached to culture and history and politics. And I think each of these songs really contained a lot of that, so we couldn't get away from it. If any of you have, I think it's on Crave, it's this absolutely incredible documentary. I think it's oh gosh, now I'm blanking on the title, but look up Taylor Mack. He has a 24-hour show. I think it's called The History of Popular Music or something like that. But he has this 24-hour performance where they go from, I think, like the 1800s to present day, going through popular songs. And Taylor Mack's 24-decade history of popular music. It's incredible. You should absolutely watch it. But every single song helps Taylor to tell the history of the United States, which is where they're based. But really, every single one of these songs had some kind of historical or political significance.
And often in these situations, as we also see more frequently these days, I think, unfortunately, that, yeah, a lot of people do use songs to say things that they're not allowed to say anymore. Whether it's when they were written or even now, songs being like that comes, songs that come with history, that movement or generations add meaning to those songs as well. So that was a really big part for, at least for me, working through this.
Yeah, I also want to share a little story about one of the songs. So there's one song, it's really like a children's song. It's called 妹妹背着洋娃娃, and the lyrics are completely nonsensical. It's just about a girl who's holding a doll and she walks into the garden. Like, it seems very insignificant. But after one of the shows, a middle-aged woman approached me, and she asked me if I could tell her the name of that song. And I said, oh yeah, this is the name. And she started crying. She burst into tears. And I said, oh, are you okay? And she said, I've been trying to find what the name of that song was because my mother recently passed away, and that was a song that she would sing to my children, her grandchildren. And so I have a video of her singing that song, but I don't know what that song is. So I've just been trying to find it so that I can learn it and sing it with my kids. So that was just such a beautiful moment that taught me, how potent music can be, and especially when it's tied to these really important memories.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. I love songs.
We're just like crying and hugging in the lobby. Yeah.
That's so sweet. Jasmine, I'm wondering, because I have probably room for one more question left until I bring it out to the audience. You guys, we're going to get to your questions soon. Don't worry. Jasmine, besides learning Chinese and the songs, what other routes did you go down to uncover your roots?
Yeah, two big ones. The first one being connecting with my family. My mother and I grew up with my mom. She single parented my sister and I for most of our lives. And I always thought I was pretty close with her, but it wasn't until I started this interview process that something really shifted for me, where I started, and I think this happens to most people as they enter adulthood, you start to realize, oh my gosh, my mom is a person, and she had a whole life before I ever came along, and she also had a whole relationship with her mother. For me, that shifting of, she was a daughter, and what was her role as her daughter when she, was living with my grandma? And that allowed me to learn so much about her and have so much more compassion for her, and to suddenly gain so much insight into how she parented me, and in turn how that affected how I turned out. So that was kind of the biggest thing. And also speaking to my sister, often you think you and your sibling had the same experience, and then you ask them, and nope, they experienced something totally different. So I learned a lot through speaking with my family members. And then the second was going to Taiwan for the first time. This was only in 2022, I got to go for the very first time, and just being in Taiwan and, feeling the climate and eating the food and seeing where my mom grew up, that was such a, just such a transformative experience and a really affirming experience. Yeah.
Would you go back?
100%, anytime.
I hear the food is really good.
So good.
I hope that, audience members, I hope that Jasmine's story and the creation aspect of this inspire you to either A, seek out other stories in different languages in the theater, or make one of your own. I hope this was really inspirational for you. And I don't know, also involve your friends in it. It's super fun. I'm going to turn to you, audience members. If anybody has any questions for these artists, please ask away. Anybody? Yes?
I'll start with a comment. Jade Circle was on my calendar. I didn't get to Richmond. But, sort of trying to say, well, if you can't get to the mountain, but this time the mountain has come to us. So thanks for coming here. And you talked about trying to translate bone. And I think it touches on like so many deep levels, maybe beyond the translation. Including say oracle bones as part of like Asian tradition. I think of epigenetics, where they're talking about right to the DNA level, the double helix spiral, which some writers have said, well, that relates to the I Ching. So, back to something bigger and smaller than an individual or a family. So I wanted to share, some of those things that had crossed my mind. Besides, like, an invitation to make a new play, including for yourself, that, ideas are bubbling. In this conversation, maybe there's another stage for Jade Circle that you might like to present again. That in hindsight you might say, well, it was like a workshop getting feedback the first time, and that not just for the audience, but it might give you a perspective to do it in a stage 2 way, and I would look forward to that. And maybe the last comment is, if I went to a play, if I went to your play, I'll often look at the calendar where there's like a talk back schedule. So, what a rich experience. Like, this is total talk back. And I'm looking at sort of your sort of screenshots. And one of the times when you're talking, like, you were standing like this, and I'm looking at the shadow from that. And there's a whole tradition of storytelling with shadows. And maybe poetically, that's what you're exploring as well. That other than the direct, like, person, like, what does a silhouette echo? What does a shadow echo? And so sort of like that. So, I wanted to give you that feedback. So the question is, are you intending to present Jade Circle again?
Yes, absolutely. We would love to. Right now, we're currently kind of in talks with folks. We're really hoping to tour, so to take it around the Lower Mainland, but also outside of the province. So yeah, I'm originally from Toronto, the Dish with One Spoon territory. So my mom keeps bugging me and saying, when are you going to bring it to Toronto so all my friends can watch it? So so definitely keep following Rice and Beans Theatre if you'd like to hear about updates. We are really hoping to bring it back. And yeah, thank you for that feedback. Definitely, I think because it is a personal story and my journey with relearning Mandarin has truly only just begun. So I think if I continue to do this piece, if time allows, I probably will continue to update it in subtle ways. Something that I've thought about for myself too is if one day I become a mother, then I will again have a very different relationship to the material. So all that to say that I think the work that we create is never static. And if you have the opportunity to create live performance, unlike film, you can continue to evolve your performance.
I hope you can make it to the next iteration. They have talkbacks. I mean, the one at Gateway, they had talkbacks every night which was
It's
really
actually built
awesome.
into the show. Yeah.
It's built
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
show. So it was really nice to have that next layer of community engagement, like really knowing your audience as theater makers and having that responsibility to hold space for that was really awesome and really nice to hear the audience's experience.
That word intimacy as well.
Yes.
It makes it really intimate to be able to have
Mm-hmm.
a two-way conversation and dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody have questions? Yes.
I've got two questions. Thanks for putting this together, by the way. First question would be, if you want to share, what was your mother's response with your first songs?
Yeah, thank you. My mom did travel out with my sister to see the show, and I was so nervous. I'm sure she was very nervous too. But a really important part of the process was sharing the script with her and making sure that she heard it ahead of time, because I wanted to make sure that I had her consent, because this, even though it was told from my perspective, I was using her voice and some audio clips, as well as transcripts from our actual conversations. So I made sure that she signed off on that. And then she saw it twice. The first time she saw it, she was very quiet. And my sister said that she could tell that she was processing a lot. There were a few tears shed. But she was really quiet in the car after the show, and I was like, oh God, she hated it. But then she saw it again with her high school friends, and my partner was sitting behind them, so he got to see all of their reactions. And he said that she was laughing and crying throughout, and her high school friends who know her better than anyone were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that, or like, oh yes, I remember your mom, things like that. So yeah, I think she was really touched by it. Yeah.
Second question would be, I grew up in Hong Kong, and there are parts of me asking for my parents stories about Hong Kong, and I get in these situations where they're really happy sharing parts of Hong Kong,
Yeah.
but they also don't want to share certain parts of
Yeah.
their grandparents.
Yeah.
How would you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for bringing that up. So it's revealed in the piece that my grandmother was imprisoned for a year. She was a political prisoner just because they suspected that maybe she was a communist sympathizer. And so she was imprisoned. And she never really spoke about that experience. And I had kind of heard about it through little snippets from different family members and from what my mother could tell me. And so, of course, there was a huge part of me that wanted to know what that experience was and what she went through. But I had to come to terms with and accept that that was her choice not to share that information, because I'm sure it was very traumatizing. So I had to learn to respect her boundaries, and to use the performance as a space to process that loss of not being able to know. Yeah.
And when it comes to interviewing people or parents, sometimes I don't do that a whole lot, but something that came to mind that might be useful is so that the people being interviewed really understand what the interview is for. That might help getting comfortable, and if it's a family member, sometimes also thinking about how to acknowledge that you're family members, but also set up a ritual. Might be too strong of a word, but set up a kind of ritual or a process to be like, hey, every month, every last Tuesday of this month, I'll make you tea, I'll make us a meal, and having some kind of, especially with family too, because it's so easy to just either go the extremes, either you just go right into it and go, hey mom, what the hell, or you just never talk about it right there, like, oh, it's nothing, it's not important. No, it's so important. I'm having similar challenges with my family about Hong Kong, because so and then it gets hard to ask about even what happens before that. So yeah, if you if you want to talk about Hong Kong some more, feel free to reach out. I would love to.
I think something that also helped as well, so something that is alluded to in the piece is my grandmother's struggles with mental health and how that really had a strain on her relationship with my mother, and ways in that my mother really had to be the parent. And this was very vulnerable for my mom to talk about, and really, really vulnerable. And I think what allowed her to be okay with sharing that was knowing that, when I explained to her, by us sharing our stories and us being vulnerable and sharing some of the darker aspects of our family history, it will allow other people to be able to have those conversations, hopefully. And in turn, if people are able to see their experiences reflected, they might be able to heal a part of themselves that was hurt through similar experiences. So I think she really understood that, and she also wanted to be able to give that, to offer that to an audience. So it was incredibly generous of her to allow me to share those parts of her story.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Yes, we have time for one more question. Oh, okay. We could do both. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of the piece, I talk about witnessing my mother taking care of her mother in the hospital. And I describe seeing my mother washing my grandmother, and that my grandmother, had this, really gross bed sore, and that my mom would clean it. And so there's something so visceral about that. And in that moment, when I was seeing that, something clicked in me, and I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do that one day. There's going to be a time when those roles will reverse. She cared for me when I was a baby, when I couldn't do anything for myself, and there will come a time where I will then, care for her in her old age. So that's one of the shifts, absolutely, that I think I'm already in that process. We're having those conversations together. She's in very good health right now, but a couple years ago she went through breast cancer, and so those talks were kind of expedited. And I think that's something that all children go through when they're thinking about their parents aging.
Mm-hmm. Yes, last one.
Thanks for this lovely opportunity, and it's glad to be here. And I'm a first generation immigrant, and my mother tongue is Punjabi. And I just want to ask you guys, and it's really inspiring for me, and things been happening around me, and had happened also into the history. And the first-hand account of the emotions or the things which are happening right now. And if we, or as a generation, or like another language, want to portray something like this into our mother language, what suggestions or your learning you can share with us? That's my question.
Yeah, Derek, we can talk about this together, but for me, because I speak both English and Mandarin, English is more of my dominant language, we were very specific about when the performance was in English and when it was in Mandarin. And oftentimes it would indicate to the audience when there was like an emotional shift. So because Mandarin for me is very much associated to childhood and my connection with my family, anytime I was going into a more emotional place, I naturally wanted to be speaking in Mandarin. And then other times when, you know, maybe it was a little more functional, I was in English. So that's just one example. So I think if you're creating in your mother tongue, you know, just thinking about what does it mean to be, you know, if you are going to have multiple languages in your piece, what does it mean to be speaking in one language versus the other? And then also the experience of the audience hearing it. You know, are you trying to speak to people who speak the same language as you, or are you speaking to a mixed crowd? And sometimes, I mean, we talked about this too, sometimes you're just doing it for the people who understand you, and there might be a little wink or a little Easter egg for them, and it's okay if the rest of the audience doesn't get it. So you get to make fun choices like that.
Yeah, and on that note, on the little Easter egg, on the little presents for people who understands, say in your case Punjabi, then yeah, it's not so much like a haha we get it and you don't kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not
like
about excluding anyone.
Yeah, it's like a I see you, you know, like I see you in the house, like I you know, same. I immediately did like with you in the back, right? Once you say you're from Hong Kong, immediately I'm like, yeah, I see you. Me too. I know. So like that's when you can really use that to your advantage, and then use that to bring the rest of the house into the story, right? Going, hey, like we're not alone, and by extension, we're not alone. Hopefully, and yeah, there's just I mean, crap. There's just so much joy to play with when you're working in your own language, and even just like discovering, like I did that too when I first, I mean I still do that. There's just little words, little phrases that I forget, and then I'll be working on this thing and go, wait, how do you say that again? And go, oh, great, this is actually just such a lost little bit of my history, of my you know, culture, and those are also very nice, kind of scary. But tender moments of like, right, yes, reminder that this is who I am, this is where I come from, this makes up so much of me, you know, like, I'm 38 and I lived in Hong Kong for like, until I was 16, 17, so like, this much of me is, you know, literally. So you know, like, just remembering there's so much of that to be waking up and like, yeah, talk to your friends, talk to your family in your own languages. Like that's how it, you know, and we all do, right? Consume media in languages that we understand and feel a kinship to, and that's so important too.
And I think you can trust that an audience,
they're smart.
regardless of what language they speak, if they don't speak Punjabi, regardless, people relate to a human story. So I think, you know, there were definitely times where I worried, ooh, like, are people not going to be interested because it's more in Mandarin than it's in English? But that was not the case at all. We had very, very mixed audiences, and across the board, people really related to it. So I think, you know, just trust in your own authenticity and how you want to tell the story.
Yeah, and that's kind of how, and that's how kind of you and that's how a story or a piece of writing becomes one of many ways, but one pretty big way of stories and writing become universally or widely what's that word? Resonant. You know, it is by being specific about the thing that you're talking about. And thanks for coming. Yeah, so like that kind of specificity, like in your case, Jasmine, right? That kind of specificity, that it's exactly that helped people, that allowed, or rather invited the audience to identify with your story.
And with that, thank you very much, everybody. We are out of time.
I'll stick around, like, so afterwards you can come chat with me outside if you want. Yeah.
Yes, if you have any more questions, please talk to the artists individually. Thank you so much, VPL, and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, also sorry, I think this building closes at 8:30, so like Is that true, Dylan? Okay. Just so people don't get trapped
Yeah.
in here.
Yeah.
And there you go. Yeah.
Feel
but-
free to chit chat, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you, Dylan.